Okay, so logic and reasoning. It's quite clear and uncontroversial. I would say that logic and reasonings are closely related terms, and that logical theory has a lot to do with reasoning. But the question is, how direct is the connection in particular, whether we can simply identify the rules of logic as we find them in logical textbooks with rules of reasoning in the sense of management of our beliefs. I think it's in certain logical and philosophical circles, it's kind of an orthodoxy that this goes without saying. That the rules which we found in logical textbooks are the rules for direct management of beliefs, and I will try to challenge this assumption. No. On. Yeah. Okay, so out of the numerous publications where you can find this view, I have selected one. So there's a rather long quotation which continues on the next slide. For over 2 millennia, since the days of Aristotle and Euclid, the notion of formal logic has figured centrally in conceptions of human reasoning, rationality, and adaptiveness. To be adaptive, the story goes, we must be rational about ends and means, truth and evidence. To be rational, we must reason about what means suit what ends, what evidence supports, what conclusions. And to reason, we must respect the canons of logic. When you hear a dog bark outside, what you hear is a sound you recognize as a bark. You infer the presence of a dog, a deduction that might go, around here, only dogs make the sound of a bark. I hear something that makes the sound of a bark. Therefore, I hear a dog. Insofar as we are successful as a species in ways beyond the reach of chimpanzees, our logical prowess may be the cause. This would really support the view that the laws of logic, laws of deduction, which we found in logical textbooks, are simply the laws of reasoning, are simply the laws which help us manage our web of beliefs in an effective and correct way. So it would suggest that logic and reasoning are not only closely related, but are simply two sides of the same coin. It would suggest that logic spells out some directives for the right management of our system of beliefs, and that the laws of logic give us prescriptions how to extend our web of beliefs in a useful and effective way. So I think this view, many logicians and philosophers would take this view as going without saying, so to say. Yeah. Now, let me give another lengthy quote from a different paper which challenges this orthodoxy. It's due to Gilbert Herman and his co-author Carl Kearney. So let me read it again. In the traditional view, reasoning can be modeled by a formal argument. You start by accepting certain premises. You then accept intermediate conclusions that follow from the premises or earlier intermediate conclusions in accordance with certain rules of inference. You end by accepting new conclusions that you have inferred directly or indirectly from your original premises. One problem with the traditional picture is its implication that reasoning is always a matter of inferring new things from what you start out believing. On the contrary, reasoning often involves abandoning things you start out believing. You regularly modify previous opinions in the light of new information. This is a topic which Gilbert Harman has been writing about for many years. Let me give you a summarization of his arguments from his 86 books as given in a paper by Hartree Field. So Field summarizes what Harman objects in his book against the direct identification of the laws of logic with the laws of reasoning in the sense of belief management. So, first objection, reasoning in the sense of change of view, in the sense of change of beliefs, doesn't follow the pattern of logical consequence. When one has beliefs A1 to AN and realizes that they together entail B, sometimes the best thing to do isn't to believe B, but to drop one of the beliefs A1 to AN. So this is the objection which was already present in the previous quotation. 2, we shouldn't clutter up our minds with irrelevancies, but we'd have to if wherever we believed A and recognized that B was a consequence of it, we believed B. So I think this is quite a decisive objection against the view that if you have a logical rule, then you can read it in the way that whenever you believe the premises, you should also acquire, in some sense, the belief to the conclusion. That's simply impossible because you would not be doing anything else than acquiring the conclusions and conclusions of the conclusions and so on and so on. There's the third objection. It's sometimes rational to have beliefs even while knowing they are jointly inconsistent if one doesn't know how the inconsistency should be avoided. There's the well-known paradox of the preface. You write a huge book and you write in the preface that you are sure that at least something which is in the book is wrong. Well, it's impossible to write a huge book without writing something which is not true, without making an error or displaying some kind of ignorance or something like that. 4. No one can recognize all the consequences of his or her beliefs. Because of this, it is not reasonable to demand that one's beliefs be closed under consequence. For similar reasons, one can't always recognize inconsistencies in one's belief. So even putting aside point 3, it is not reasonable to demand that one's beliefs be consistent. Okay, so these are Harman's objections as summarized by Field, and in the paper from which this summary is taken, Field tries to refute Harman's objections. I would say he's not quite successful, but I'm not going to talk about this today. It seems to me that if we were to take this criticism at face value, we would conclude that the principal problem with the identification of laws of logic with laws of reasoning is in that reasoning does not always follow kind of the direction of the laws of logic. We not always reason from premises to conclusion, but sometimes we use the law to argue from the negation of the conclusion to the negation of one of the premises or something like that, even in more complicated ways. I think that the error of the identification of the laws of logic with laws of reasoning is in a sense deeper. I think that it follows from the assumption, which I think is quite common among current philosophers and logicians, that logic should start at the point where we have beliefs. We have beliefs, and logic should tell us what reasonable we can do with them. I think that this is not correct, because we need logic to have beliefs at all, as far as I can see. So, if we think that it's not a business of logic to tell us what are beliefs and how we can have them, then we get a basically distorted picture of what logic or a philosophical application of logic can do. So the assumption which I want to challenge, and which I think is very widespread by now, is that logic is a kind of a, if I leave out purely formal and mathematical logic, which is about purely formal structures, so maybe philosophical logic, is a theory of individuals' epistemic achievements. I think this way of thinking about logic leads us in a blind alley, because beliefs with which logic has to do are essentially entities which are, so to say, cast in the social mold. And that, more importantly, the laws of logic have to do with the ways in which these beliefs are cast in this mold. Not so much with how the beliefs are then used when they are already completed. So, my contention is that the ability of reasoning has an essential social dimension, and logic should be seen as related to this dimension. So this counters the assumption that logic should concentrate on an individual, on what an individual does with her beliefs. I think that many people think, well, how one comes to have beliefs and what are beliefs, it's no business for logic, because, I don't know, cognitive scientists should tell us. And only then we should start to think about the laws of logic. I think that another way in which we can articulate the fact that the belief has an essential social dimension is the claim that belief is, in a sense, a normative entity. But again, this is not something I will be talking about today, or at least I will not be focusing on this today. What is the most important, or what should be seen as the most important thesis of my talk today is that the rules of logic are not tactical rules dictating feasible strategies of a game, perhaps the game of the management of one's beliefs. Rather, they are the rules constitutive of the game as such. So, there's of course the comparison of language with chess. In chess, you have two kinds of rules. One kind of rules is constitutive of chess. You should move the bishop only diagonally. You should move the rook doesn't so, and you should do castling in such way. And these are what I call constitutive rules. And then you have something like tactical rules. So you should not exchange your queen for a bishop, for example. You can do it, of course, but it's stupid. You are not likely to win the game if you do this. So these are two different kind of rules. For example, my grandson, who is 5 now, plays chess in the sense that he knows the constitutive rules. He has no idea about the tactical rules, so he does incredible things, but still it's in a sense it's still chess. So, in the rest of the talk, I would want to go in the following 4 steps. First, I will argue that logical rules, as they came to be constructed at the dawn of modern logic, I mean in the hands of Frege and our founding fathers of modern logic, are primarily concerned not with reasoning in the sense of belief management, but with demonstrations and proofs. This might seem to be not so important difference, but I think it's crucial. Second point, rules which govern demonstrations and proofs can be seen as rules of certain language games, especially the game of giving and asking for reasons. This might again not be too surprising. Third, this might be a little bit more surprising. Demonstration and argumentation are not externalizations of reasoning in the sense of a mental activity. It may be the other way around. And the third point is the conclusion, which I've already presented as the crucial thesis of the talk. Logical and perhaps our inferential rules are constitutive rather than tactical rules. So, let us go through these 4 points in the sequence. So first, let's have one more quotation, this time from Frege's Begriffsschrift, which I think you will agree is one of the crucial points of birth of modern logic. So, Frege says, we can inquire, on the one hand, how we have gradually arrived at a given proposition, and, on the other, how we can finally provide it with the most secure foundation. The most reliable way of carrying out a proof, obviously, is to follow pure logic, a way that, disregarding the particular characteristics of objects, depends solely on those laws upon which all knowledge rests. So, at first sight, it might seem that Frege gives us precisely the advice to use the laws of logic for our reasoning. At first sight. But at second sight, it's not literally so. First thing is that Frege explicitly says that the laws of logic should not or need not concern what's going on in our head when we, for example, arrive at some discovery or something like that. That's one thing, how we get to a belief in our head. It's our thing, how to carry out a proof. Well, what's the difference? Well, what happens in our head might be very complicated thing. When you look at some records of eminent scientists who did some eminent discoveries and describe how they managed to do it, there's nothing which would, usually nothing which would resemble anything like logical deduction or something like that. So, for example, even if we admitted that there's something as a deduction going on in our heads, in my head, I could do great leaps, for example. But when I am to present a proof, I must do small step, because the proof is something which should be intelligible and clear and surveyable for anybody. So, to use the kinds of laws which Frege presented in the Begriffsschrift is necessary if you want to have a proof which could be used to convince everybody that something is the case. So it's public proving, not private reasoning. What interests Frege. Another thing is that I think Frege doesn't give us a tactical advice how to do the proofs. Well, use these rules if you want to be quick in reaching right conclusions, something like that. No, he says, you must use the laws of logic in order to be sure that what you present is a real proof. He said nothing about the effectivity of proving or something like that. That's like the advice. If you play chess, you must follow the rules of chess. Otherwise, it's no chess. It's not like the rules. If you want to play chess reasonably, you should not exchange your queen for the opponent's bishop or something like that. So it seems to me that the advice to follow the laws of logic is not a strategic advice helping us searching correct proofs effectively, but rather a kind of prudential advice helping us not to leave the realm of logic. So, just like the laws of chess, the laws of logic do not tell us how to play well, but how to play at all. Of course, that any kind of move I do in a chess game must accord with the laws of chess. Just like any step of a proof must accord with the rules of logic. But that's not to say that these rules tell us how to do the thing somehow reasonably, effectively, and so on, and so on. Take the rule of natural deduction which leads from A to a disjunction. There is no doubt that this is a correct and very essential law of logic. But does it mean that we should routinely reason from A to A or B? Of course, there might be situations where this is needed. For example, I know how to derive something from A or B, and I have only A, so in a sense I have to carry out this step. But in general, it is not a step which would be very helpful, and hence which should be said in this sense we should do. So this is the first point of my argument. The laws of logic, as they were put together in the dawn of modern logic, are more laws constitutive of logic, and as I will argue later, of logical constants, than some kind of tactical rules which could be applied to belief management or something like that. Now, the second point says that equivalently, we can see the rules as rules of certain games. This is not very surprising, and I don't think I have to dwell on it. Just an example, rules like the previous one determine the function of logical connectives, in this case disjunction. And we can express this alternatively, saying that the role of the connectives, that way determine the role of the connectives within the relevant language games. So we can go from Frege to Gensen, who put more stress on the rules, especially on the rules of natural deduction, and then we can continue to Lorenzen, who, we may say, in effect, reinterpreted the rules as rules of certain games. So it's, and I think that this kind of game theoretical interpretation very well accords with the public nature of the games. So I said that the important thing for Frege was that the proof must be something which is public and intelligible and clear and persuasive for everybody, because remember that the principal aim of Frege's efforts was to build a framework which we do away with any kind of quarrels about proofs in arithmetics or more generally in mathematics. So games are essentially a public matter. So I think that the public nature of the rules is aptly stressed if we express them in the game, in some game theoretical terms. Now the third point. The usual view is that demonstration, argumentations, language games, etc. are mere externalization of an inner process of reason. So language is not so important, game is not so important, what happens in public space is not so much important. The important thing is what happens in individual heads. The kinematics and dynamics of beliefs which happens there. This presupposes the picture which I distance myself from at the beginning, that one can have beliefs without being a speaker, without being an arguer, without being a social being. I think this is not the case. Unfortunately, I will not be able to argue for this here in such a detail in which it would be needed. So, according to me, the alternative view is that reasoning is a way of thinking that has come into being by a process of internalization of the praxis of argumentation. This is, of course, a controversial thesis, which was nevertheless, which has been nevertheless argued for by several people in ways which for me are quite persuasive. Let me first say briefly something about Wilfrid Sellars. Wilfrid Sellars, about his often discussed paper about the myth of the given. It's called 3 Lectures on Empiricism and so on. Argues that the root of all concepts we use for addressing what's happening in human heads are semantic concepts. So that the concept of belief is derivative to the concept of the meaning of the proposition in the sense of meaning of sentence. So, moreover, Sellars argues that it was only after this construal of our, so to say, inner world as a world inhabited by beliefs, desires, and so on, that we were really able to understand ourselves as having beliefs, desires, and all these entities which we nowadays take as quite naturally inhabiting our minds. A similar argument can be found in Donald Davidson's writing. Davidson has a very peculiar notion of subjectivity. Very peculiar, I think correct. He says, human mind is not subjective in the sense that it would be a kind of an inner space into which only I was able to see. So, subjectivity in the sense that there is something which is accessible only to me and to nobody else. Davidson says that human mind is subjective only in 2 senses. In one sense is that my beliefs are mine, just as my car is mine. So that's one sense. There's a sense in which I own my beliefs, and not somebody else. The second sense is that I know what's in my mind in a different way than other people know it. In some more direct way. But Davidson argues that it is not the case that other people would not be able to learn what exactly my belief is. According to the Cartesian picture, you cannot even know what kind of entities anybody believes is because you can't see in his or her inner space. But Davidson says, as all these entities are, as I used the phrase earlier, are cast in the social mold, we all know what they are. So again, in Davidson, we find arguments for the public origin of beliefs. Now, recently, there are also some arguments coming from science. Mercier and Sperber have written an article which appeared in Brain and Behavioral Sciences, where they argue that from the evolutionary viewpoint, it is much more plausible to assume that reasoning is the internalization of argumentation than the other way around. So the argumentation is, of course, partly speculative, so in this sense partly let's say, philosophical, but partly based on some empirical evidence. So that's, I think, interesting. So, if this is true, then I am ready to conclude that logical rules constitute conjunctions, disjunctions, negations in the very same sense in which the rules of chess constitute pawns, rooks, or bishops. Think about the rules of chess. What happens when you learn and accept the rules of chess in the sense that you start to play a game? There is a kind of a new space opening for you. A space of chess games in which you can do things which you wouldn't be able to do elsewhere. You can check the opponent's king. You can attack with your rooks and knights and I don't know what. You can castle. And sometimes it's a real adventure, as many of you undoubtedly know. Now it seems to me that it's very similar with the laws of logic. Quite similarly, they opened up a brand new space of, in this case, of reasoning. Again, there is quite a new world before you. You can do things you would have never dreamed before. So, the thesis is that the rules of logic have to do with opening up this space, or, which is equivalent to this, created the entities on which kind of this space rests. The entities like conjunction, disjunctions, implications, and so on. The question, how to effectively move inside the space, is a subsequent question. So, we should not confuse the rules which make up the space with the rules which advise us how to reasonably or effectively or I don't know how, move inside of this space. Let me mention one kind of, let's say, an application of this view. Let us ask the following question. Can we fail modus ponens? Well, of course we can. Of course I can make a mistake, I can do something which violates modus ponens. But can we somehow fail modus ponens on a regular ground? There is a relatively large body of anthropologic studies about foreign cultures who claim that they have different logics. They, for example, don't follow modus ponens. For example, there was a Soviet psychologist called Luria, which was for some time half forgotten, and then he was rediscovered in the West and published in the West. And he did a lot of research with some native tribes somewhere in Siberia, and argued that they didn't follow our laws of logic. For example, he asked them, somewhere only white bears live, somewhere in the north. I killed a bear there. What was its color? And the native answers, I don't know, I wasn't there. This is of course an anecdotic example which could be perhaps explained away in some pragmatic terms, but he presented our examples which were cases which looked like a straightforward violation of modus ponens, for example. Is this possible? Well, I think not, because in order for something to be a modus ponens, it must contain implication. How we know that the phrase of the natives is an implication? How we know, for that matter, that somebody who uses the sounds if then uses them as an implication, that they mean implication in his or her mouth? Well, I cannot think about any other way to learn this, save to check whether he or she follows modus ponens using these sounds. Well, it's not. I don't say it's a sufficient condition, but I think it's a necessary condition to call something an implication. So it seems to me that there is a sense in which there's no way of failing modus ponens on a regular basis. What, of course, we can diagnose is that somebody doesn't have an implication at all. That's, of course, possible. That he or she has something which might look as an implication, but on closer scrutiny, it is not. So, I think a reasonable conclusion is that, in fact, the natives don't have an implication at all, something like that. By the way, it's a footnote that gives kind of credence to Wittgenstein's enigmatic remarks that, in fact, we cannot violate the laws of logic. Now, this seems very strange because we think that there is a sense in which logic is an arbiter of rationality. Yeah? That we should be able to say whether somebody is a logical and hence rational creature and somebody is not. So it seems that we should be able to say that he or she follows the laws of logic or doesn't follow the laws of logic. Well, in a sense, it's true. But from the viewpoint I have presented here, being rational is being in the space of reasoning. That means, in other words, having implications, negation, etc. Not using them in an appropriate way, because in a sense you cannot use implication until it is implication in an inappropriate way. Well, you can do an occasional mistakes, of course, as an exception. So the view is that there's a space of reasoning which is constituted by the laws of logic, and which we enter insofar as we accept the rules of logic. And to be in the space is the same thing as having the denizens, the entities which kind of constitute it, on which it is based. The logical entities like implication, conjunction, disjunction, and so on and so on. So, in this sense, I would say that in an abbreviated way, we can say that logic as such doesn't tell us how to reason, but provides us with some materials with which to reason. Yeah. Now, to conclude, let me get back to the 4 points I have presented already in the middle of the talk. So the first point was that logical rules, as they were introduced by Frege and perhaps some other founding fathers of modern logic, are not rules of reasoning in the sense of doing something in one's mind, but rather rules for proving, demonstrating. Well, the rules, the word demonstration is better than proof, because it carries with it its essential social dimension. Demonstration is something which you normally do publicly. And of course, the Latin word for proof is demonstratio, so it's not in any sense far-fetched. So, abbreviating, Frege, it seems to me, was talking about demonstrating that something is the case, demonstrating in a foolproof way, not about ways of discovering truth. What is important that if you want to demonstrate something in a foolproof way, you have to do it. The most important thing is that you do it in such a way that it's clear that you follow the rules of logic. Yeah? So, in each step, it should be clear that you hold to a constitutive rule of some of the logical constants. Now, the point 2, again, is almost trivial, because we all know that standard and also some non-standard logics can be equivalently expressed in game theoretical terms. So, from the technical point of view, this is no problem. But I only want to stress that when we see rules in this way, their public demonstrative nature is reinforced, and from this viewpoint, it's, I think, quite useful. Now, there is a third point claiming that demonstration and argumentation are not externalizations of reasoning. Well, I don't pretend that I gave a knockdown argument for this. I mostly presented views of some, by my light, clever people who say so. But I cannot imagine how we could come to have belief as the separated and encapsulated information units otherwise than via coming to talk with each other using sentences. Yeah. Now there's the last and most important point, which I think is not kind of directly dependent on everything which precedes it. So it might still stand if somebody above is rejected. I think, and this is, as I said, the crucial point. Rules of logic are not rules which would tell us what to do to effectively, quickly, and I don't know how, reach correct conclusions. They are not tactical rules which would advise us how to, metaphorically said, win the game of reasoning in the sense in which some rules can tell us how to win the games of chess. They are, it seems to me, constitutive rules, which open up the space of reasoning, constitute certain entities on which this space rests, and which furnish our mind with some necessarily materials for reasoning. I think that might be all. Thank you.